Hello and welcome to Maritime Mysteries. Tonight I'm taking you on a journey through 5 chilling tales that will shake you to your core. From sunken ships lost in time to ghostly vessels that vanish without a trace, these stories will blur the line between reality and the impossible. Before we plunge into the unknown, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? Could one of these haunted waters be closer to you than you think? Dim the lights, settle in, and get ready. What you're about to hear will haunt you long after it's over. 5 stories, 5 haunting cries, and 1 terrifying question. What happens when the sea speaks and no one can answer? Our first story takes us back to 1943. Deep into the heart of World War II, the Atlantic Ocean was a battleground, its waters teeming with warships, U-boats, and submarines locked in a deadly struggle for dominance. Among them was the USS Scorpion, a cutting-edge Gato-class submarine in the U.S. Navy's arsenal. Designed for stealth and firepower, the Scorpion was tasked with hunting enemy vessels and disrupting critical supply lines. The Scorpion was no ordinary submarine. It was built for war, armed with torpedoes and advanced communication systems. Its crew of 70 men carried out dangerous missions in enemy-controlled waters. In the summer of 1943, the submarine embarked on what would be its final patrol. Somewhere in the cold, unforgiving depths of the Atlantic, the Scorpion went silent. Reports from the time suggest the submarine may have struck a German mine. The explosion would have been catastrophic, ripping through the hull and flooding the compartments in seconds. With no chance for escape, the vessel and its entire crew were lost to the ocean's depths. The official Navy report marked it as another wartime tragedy, devastating but not uncommon during those perilous years. The Scorpion was declared sunk, its position marked on wartime charts as a graveyard beneath the waves. But in 1944, something impossible happened. A routine night for a radio operator somewhere in the Atlantic until it wasn't. Through the crackling static, a voice broke through.
Desperate, terrified, taking on water. All crew lost.
The submarine identified itself as the USS Scorpion. The operator scrambled to alert authorities, but there was one massive problem. The USS Scorpion had been sunk a year earlier. No survivors, no chance of transmissions. Experts dismissed the incident, chalking it up to interference or a hoax. But then, something unexplainable happened again. In the years following the initial 1944 incident, the same distress call from the USS Scorpion was reported multiple times across the Atlantic. Notably, on March 6, 1946, at 02:17 GMT, a British merchant vessel near the Azores intercepted the same message. Similarly, on July 12, 1947, at 23:42 GMT, a Canadian naval station in Nova Scotia recorded an identical transmission. These recurring signals, mirroring the original distress call word for word, left experts baffled and deepened the enigma surrounding the Scorpion's fate. The persistence of these messages, years after the submarine's confirmed sinking, challenges conventional understanding and raises unsettling questions about their origin. Same chilling tone, same desperate plea. The message seemed frozen in time, replaying itself over and over, as if the submarine was still trapped somewhere, screaming for help. What could possibly explain this? A time loop? A ghostly echo from the depths? While the USS Scorpion's cries remain a chilling enigma, the ocean hides something even darker. In 1924, aboard the SS Watertown, the dead refused to stay silent, and the line between life and death shattered into something truly horrifying. 1924, the SS Watertown, a humble oil tanker, was making its routine voyage from California to New Orleans. Life aboard the ship was predictable: grueling labor, camaraderie, and the endless, unchanging horizon. But on this trip, something far darker would stain its history. Two crewmen, James Courtney and Michael Meehan, were assigned the dangerous task of cleaning a gas tank. Tragedy struck when fumes overwhelmed them. They collapsed and were declared dead, their bodies buried at sea the next day, as per maritime tradition. The crew mourned, but the journey continued, or so they thought. Just days after the burial, the ship's captain made a chilling report. As the SS Watertown cut through the waves, the faces of Courtney and Meehan appeared in the water trailing the vessel, pale, distorted, and staring directly at the ship. Their ghostly visages sent shivers through the crew. It wasn't a fleeting vision either. The faces appeared again and again, night after night, as if they were following the ship. The terror escalated when the ship's radio, which hadn't been used in days, suddenly crackled to life. Garbled transmissions began echoing through the equipment. At first it was unintelligible, a mix of static and faint whispers, but soon the voices grew clear. They weren't just any voices. They were unmistakably those of Courtney and Meehan. The SS Watertown was miles from shore. There was no logical explanation for how these messages were being broadcast. No one was near the radio, and its controls were untouched. Panic gripped the crew. Some whispered of a curse. Others refused to go near the equipment, fearing it was possessed. In an effort to make sense of the impossible, the captain attempted to record the transmissions. What he captured was beyond disturbing. Faint cries for help layered over static, guttural whispers, and an eerie hum that didn't belong to any known frequency. Listening to the playback only deepened the horror, as the voices seemed to grow more anguished with each replay. Experts examined the recordings, but offered no explanation. The equipment was functioning normally, the ship's logs were consistent, and no external transmissions were detected. And yet, the voices persisted. Over time, the SS Watertown became notorious for its haunted history, and some crew members refused to sail on her again. But the story didn't end there. Years later, other ships reported hearing garbled transmissions in the same area of the ocean, eerily similar to those from the Watertown's radio. They all described the same desperate cries, the same ghostly voices calling out, word for word. What was it? A rip in reality? The answers remain as elusive as the ocean's depths. One thing is certain: the SS Watertown's voyage etched a chilling warning. As we plunge deeper into maritime lore, the stories become darker, stranger, and harder to explain. The next chilling tale takes us back to the 1970s, where a series of haunting events brought a forgotten tragedy roaring back to life. This is the story of the HMS Eurydice, a name etched in blood and mystery. The HMS Eurydice was a symbol of British naval pride, a sleek and formidable training ship carrying young sailors eager to serve their country. In March 1878, she was returning to Portsmouth after routine drills in the West Indies. Her mission was simple: train the next generation of seafarers and bring them home. The ship was loaded with supplies, a mix of seasoned officers and eager recruits, and the energy of a voyage nearing its end. The weather that day seemed calm. A bright, crisp afternoon with a light breeze guiding her toward the English coast. The crew relaxed, spirits high as they anticipated a warm welcome at Portsmouth. But the ocean has a way of hiding its fury until it's too late. Without warning, the skies darkened. A sudden and violent snowstorm swept over the channel, catching the Eurydice completely off guard. The temperature plummeted as an icy wind howled through the rigging. Blinding snow whipped across the deck, turning it into a slippery death trap. The storm hit with such ferocity that it ripped through the sails, tearing them apart like fragile paper. Within minutes, the ship capsized, her once proud mast disappearing beneath the icy waves. Over 300 men were thrown into the freezing waters, their screams cutting through the storm. Some clung to debris, but the cold was unforgiving. Hypothermia set in almost instantly, and the sea claimed them, one by one. Only 2 men survived to tell the tale, pulled from the wreckage by a passing vessel. Their accounts painted a horrifying picture of the Eurydice's final moments, a ship overwhelmed by nature's fury, her crew helpless against the storm's brutal onslaught. The sinking of the HMS Eurydice became one of the deadliest peacetime naval disasters in British history. A haunting reminder of the sea's unforgiving power. Yet, as devastating as her loss was, it was only the beginning of her story. For nearly a century, the ship rested silently beneath the waves, its story relegated to dusty history books, until the 1970s, when something impossible began to unfold. Radio operators along the southern English coast began picking up distress calls. The transmissions were faint, but unmistakable, desperate pleas for help, followed by the chilling words,
"This is the HMS Eurydice. We are sinking."
The operators were stunned. The Eurydice had been lost for almost 100 years. There was no way it could be sending out a mayday. What made the transmissions even more unsettling were the coordinates they included that matched the exact location of the shipwreck. At first, the calls were dismissed as a cruel prank or a malfunction, but as the days turned into weeks, more and more operators reported receiving the same terrified tone. It was as if the Eurydice was still fighting for survival, trapped in an endless loop of its final moments. And then, the sightings began. In the early hours of March 8, 1972, a group of fishermen off the Isle of Wight reported seeing a ship emerging from the dense fog near Dunno's Point, the exact site of the HMS Eurydice wreck. The vessel was described as eerily intact, its masts tall and its sails billowing. Though the air was completely still, the fishermen approached cautiously, calling out to the ship, but it didn't respond. Instead, it slowly faded back into the mist, vanishing entirely. The men swore it was the Eurydice, her shape unmistakable. On April 15, 1974, a local Coast Guard officer, David Turner, claimed to have seen the ghostly ship in broad daylight. Turner was patrolling the cliffs near Ventnor when he noticed what looked like a fully rigged ship out at sea. At first, he thought it was a historic reenactment or some sort of naval demonstration. But as he watched, the ship began to sink, slipping beneath the waves with an unnatural swiftness. There were no sounds of distress, no crew visible, and no debris left behind. Turner, shaken and unable to explain what he had witnessed, filed an official report. But the incident was dismissed as an optical illusion. In August 1975, a group of sailors aboard a chartered yacht near the wreck site encountered the Eurydice, under even more bizarre circumstances. As they sailed through a calm patch of water on a clear night, their onboard radio crackled to life. Through the static, a desperate mayday call broke through.
This is the HMS Eurydice. We are sinking.
The sailors froze. The coordinates given matched the precise location of the Eurydice's wreck, but there were no ships in the area, and the voice soon faded, leaving only silence. When they relayed the incident to the Coast Guard, they were met with skepticism and warnings to avoid the area. These sightings and transmissions continued sporadically throughout the 1970s, sparking both fear and fascination. Historians attempted to rationalize the reports. Some suggested they were the result of atmospheric conditions creating mirages, known as Fata Morgana. Others speculated that the ghostly sightings could be echoes of the ship's tragic end, somehow imprinted in the environment and replaying under specific conditions. One theory even pointed to underwater geological activity disrupting electromagnetic waves, which could theoretically produce unusual visual and auditory phenomena. But none of these explanations accounted for the vivid details or the consistency of the sightings. No explanation has ever fully accounted for the transmissions or the spectral appearances of the HMS Eurydice. Were these events echoes of a traumatic past preserved in some unknown way? A ghostly imprint replaying itself over and over? Or something far more sinister, an entity using the Eurydice's name and tragic fate as a mask for its own dark purpose? To this day, sailors and fishermen near Dunnos Point speak in hushed tones about the waters where the Eurydice went down. Many refuse to venture there, fearing the ship's ghostly call, because those who hear her mayday, they say, might find themselves following her to the depths. It's no clear explanation how these mysteries are possible, but we're moving on to one of the most bone-chilling tales yet. A story soaked in death, despair, and something that defies all logic. This is the tragedy of the SS Valencia, a wreck so horrifying that its echoes still haunt the seas off Vancouver's coast to this day. The SS Valencia, a modest passenger steamship, set sail from San Francisco to Seattle in January. A routine voyage quickly turned into a nightmare as the ship encountered a violent storm while navigating the treacherous waters off Vancouver Island's western shore. The raging seas and blinding winds threw the Valencia off course, smashing her against jagged rocks near the ominously named Graveyard of the Pacific. Chaos erupted on board. Passengers screamed in terror as the waves tore through the ship's hull, flooding compartments and dragging lifeboats into the icy depths. In the frantic evacuation, lifeboats capsized, dumping their occupants into the freezing ocean. Out of over 100 passengers and crew, only 37 survived, rescued by a handful of lifeboats that miraculously made it to shore. What made the wreck especially horrifying were the reports from survivors. As the Valencia sank, they claimed to see lifeboats drifting away, packed with dead bodies. The ship itself became an apocalyptic scene of despair, with passengers clinging to the rigging as waves swallowed them one by one. The screams of the doomed haunted the rescuers for years. Decades after the wreck of the SS Valencia, her story refused to sink into obscurity. Strange encounters near the wreck site began to surface, chilling even the most seasoned sailors. On January 27, a group of fishermen off the west coast of Vancouver Island claimed to spot a lifeboat drifting aimlessly near Pachena Point, smack in the middle of the Graveyard of the Pacific. As they drew closer, they were struck by its pristine condition. The lifeboat appeared untouched by time. Its paint was vivid, the wood unweathered, and the Valencia's name was still clearly stenciled on its bow. But what truly unnerved them was what they didn't find. No passengers, no supplies. The lifeboat was completely empty, as if frozen in a moment from night. But the most baffling discovery was a functioning radio transmitter inside the lifeboat. A device far more advanced than anything that existed when the Valencia went down. The equipment showed signs of recent use, yet there were no signs of life, no evidence of how it got there. The fishermen, shaken and unsure of what they had encountered, reported the incident to the authorities. But no trace of the lifeboat was ever found again. The mystery only deepened in the decades that followed. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, faint SOS signals were picked up by ships and coastal stations near the wreck site. The transmissions were chillingly repetitive, crackling with desperation.
Valencia, lifeboats lost, need help.
These messages were traced to coordinates that aligned perfectly with the wreck's location, but every investigation came up empty. No ship, no wreckage, and no logical source for the signals. In 1947, a Canadian Navy patrol boat stationed near Vancouver Island reported hearing the same distress call, repeating over several hours before fading into silence. The crew, skeptical at first, confirmed the signals were coming from the wreck site. Despite a thorough search, they found nothing, only the eerie calm of the ocean. By the 1950s, local fishermen began to avoid the area altogether, sharing tales of lifeboats spotted in the mist. One account, from October 1955, described a lifeboat eerily similar to those from the Valencia, bobbing in calm waters. As the fishermen approached, the boat seemed to shimmer before vanishing completely, leaving no trace it was ever there. The SOS signals continued sporadically into the 1960s, each one a ghostly echo of the Valencia's tragedy. The repetition of the distress call, always the same desperate plea,
Valencia, lifeboats lost, need help,
convinced many that these were no ordinary anomalies. Locals whispered that the souls of the lost passengers were trapped, endlessly crying out for rescue that would never come. To this day, the graveyard of the Pacific remains shrouded in unease. The wreck of the SS Valencia has been extensively studied, yet no rational explanation has ever been found for the lifeboat sightings or the phantom distress calls. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: those who venture near the Valencia's wreck often leave with more questions than answers, and for some, the chilling echoes of her final moments are enough to keep them away for good. We've journeyed through chilling mysteries, but this final story defies logic, science, and everything we understand about the natural world. It's the haunting tale of the SS Baychimo, a ship that refused to die, drifting through Arctic waters for decades. Her ghostly presence, a challenge to reason itself. This horrifying truth that has baffled researchers and terrified sailors for nearly a century. The SS Baychimo was a marvel of human ingenuity, a 1,300-ton steel cargo steamer built in 1914 to withstand the Arctic's brutal conditions. At 20-30 feet long, with a reinforced hull designed to crush through frozen seas, she was a towering juggernaut of the northern trade routes. Her purpose was vital, carrying furs, supplies, and goods between Europe and remote Arctic communities. For those who worked aboard her, the Baychimo represented strength, reliability, and survival in one of the harshest environments on Earth. In October 1931, the Baychimo departed Vancouver, Canada, bound for Sweden, her hull loaded with precious furs destined for European markets. The voyage was routine. She had navigated these treacherous Arctic waters countless times before. But as she approached the Alaskan coastline near the Beaufort Sea, the Arctic unleashed a force that even this steel giant couldn't overcome. On October 8th, 1931, a sudden, brutal cold snap descended upon the region. The waves stilled, and the frigid temperatures turned the ocean into an unyielding sheet of ice. The Baychimo became trapped, her massive hull groaning and shuddering as the ice tightened its grip. The crew fought valiantly, using every tool and ounce of strength they had to free her, but the ice refused to budge. As days turned into weeks, the Arctic's merciless grip deepened. Temperatures plunged to below 50 degrees, and gale-force winds howled through the frozen expanse, tearing at the ship and the men who fought to survive aboard her. Supplies dwindled, and the crew faced frostbite, exhaustion, and the bone-chilling realization that their indomitable ship might become their icy tomb. By November 1931, rescue finally arrived. An aircraft evacuated the exhausted crew, leaving behind the Baychimo, a frozen colossus seemingly defeated by the Arctic. The ship was expected to collapse under the pressure of the ice and sink beneath the frigid waters, as so many others had before. But what happened next would defy all logic. Against all odds, the Baychimo didn't sink. Days after the crew's evacuation, reports began to surface. Inuit hunters spotted the ship drifting aimlessly through the icy expanse, fully intact but eerily silent. In March 1932, nearly 5 months after being abandoned, a trading party stumbled across the Baychimo 300 miles from where she had been left. How could she have moved? She had no crew, no propulsion, and was locked in ice. Attempts to board the ship revealed her cargo was untouched, her hull seemingly unscathed. But before the traders could salvage her, a sudden blizzard forced them to retreat. When they returned, the Baychimo was gone. Over the next 4 decades, she continued to defy explanation. From 1933 to 1969, the Baychimo was sighted numerous times by whalers, Inuit hunters, and Arctic explorers, always the same. Drifting silently, her massive hull cutting through the ice like a ghost. Her condition remained inexplicably pristine, even as decades passed. In 1962, a group of explorers attempted to board her, only to be driven away by an unexpected storm. She vanished again, as if the Arctic itself was protecting her secret. The most chilling part of the Baychimo story came in 1981. A Canadian research team, operating near the Beaufort Sea, intercepted a faint distress call on an old maritime frequency. The signal was traced to coordinates near the last reported location of the Baychimo. When the researchers investigated, they found nothing. No ship, no wreckage, only the silent expanse of Arctic ice. Now, what made this even more baffling was that the frequency hadn't been used since the early 20th century, the same type of radio the Baychimo would have had. No rational explanation could account for this transmission. The Baychimo had no crew, no functioning equipment, yet the signal persisted, as though the ship herself was crying out for help. Scientists and historians have tried to make sense of the Baychimo's eerie persistence. Could the Baychimo have been caught in an Arctic current, drifting endlessly through the ice? Perhaps, but science fails to explain how her steel frame endured the Arctic's wrath for decades, untouched by rust, decay, or the crushing pressure of frozen seas that should have torn her apart. She didn't just float, she roamed, defying every law of nature. Some scientists speculated about Arctic mirages, illusions caused by temperature inversions. But how does a mirage broadcast an SOS signal on a long-abandoned frequency? How does an illusion leave tracks in the ice and vanish before it can be boarded? Theories crumble against the chilling reality. The Baychimo was more than a derelict. She was an anomaly, a phantom vessel that refused to be claimed by nature or time. Others speak of something darker, an unknown force within the Arctic, as cold and unrelenting as the ice itself, that took hold of the Baychimo and made her its own. A ship that defies decay, that appears and vanishes at will, sending signals from the void. A haunting, floating challenge to the very foundation of science and reason. The Baychimo has not been seen since the late 1960s, but her legend lingers in the frozen silence of the Arctic. She remains the Arctic ghost ship, a nightmare for the rational mind, a specter that no scientist can explain. To this day, there are no clear answers. How did she survive for so long, unscathed and unbound? How did her ghostly cries echo across time? The questions hang like frost in the air, unyielding and unanswered. The Arctic holds its secrets tightly, and the Baychimo is its ultimate enigma, a ship that tore through the fabric of understanding and vanished, leaving only fear in her wake. If you were to hear her call, echoing faintly through the frozen expanse, would you risk answering, knowing that some mysteries are too terrifying to face? It's Maritime Mysteries, and I hope you were as shocked and chilled as I was uncovering these terrifying tales. What do you think? Did I miss anything? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next one.